Welcome to the Counselling Tutor Podcast, the must-listen-to podcast for students of counselling and psychotherapy. Here are your hosts, Rory Lees-Oakes and Ken Kelly.
Hi, I'm Rory, and with me as always is Ken. How are you doing, Ken?
I'm exceptionally well. Thank you for asking, Rory. And how are you joining us today on the Counselling Tutor Podcast? We both hope that you are well. This is episode 187. And we've got three topics we're going to be looking at today with our student check-in, where we kind of recognise something that students may come across in their counselling training. We're going to be speaking about CBT, that's cognitive behavioural therapy, and more specifically, the use of homework in CBT. We then check in with our digital counselling revolution, where we recognise that technology now forms a large part of how students train in counselling training, how therapy is delivered and how therapy is consumed by our clients. Technology is playing more and more of a part. And today we're going to be speaking about asynchronous communication, so that's text and email, and we're specifically going to be speaking about the timings of such communications. And then to end episode 187, we go into our practice matters section. That's where we dip our toe into something we may come across in practice. And today we have Simon Heath, who's going to be speaking about ecotherapy, and he recently did a lecture for us in our Counsellor CPD library, and he's going to be sharing a little bit about ecotherapy and about topics from the lecture that he delivered for us. But starting off with that student check-in, CBT and the use of homework. When I hear the word homework, Rory, ice goes cold. I remember school, hated homework, but it's a good thing, isn't it, when you relate it to CBT?
It is a good thing when you relate it to CBT. And really, if we take it really back, we can remember Albert Ellis, who started really the CBT sort of approach. He had a theory called REBT, Rational Emotive Behavioural Therapy. And as a young man, he was very nervous around women. So he set himself a bit of homework and he went to the local park to talk to 100 women. And by the time he talked to 100 women, he felt more comfortable speaking with women. And I think that gives you a really good indication of a kind of CBT homework where someone has a perception of something and the CBT therapist gets them to challenge their own perception. And at the end, kind of review how they are now. So in terms of Albert Ellis, he was very, very nervous. So that, if there was a CBT therapist, he said, well, why don't you just go and talk to some women and, just have a chat and see how that is. And the more you do it, the more it'll become a kind of normal thing to do. And when you've finished, come back and tell me how that is. And he did that. And of course, it changed his way of connecting with and talking to women. So homework is really at the heart of cognitive behavioural therapy. And really, really interesting, Ken, I found some research that says one of the reasons for CBT failing is homework non-compliance. So it is such a definite part of CBT that if people don't do the homework, almost certainly the therapy won't work.
Yeah, when we're speaking about CBT, we're speaking about I like to say, a flavour of therapy. So therapy is like the food, and there are many different flavours. There's transactional analysis, which is a different flavour, person-centred, which is a different flavour. And they have underpinning theories that differentiate them, some things that are the same. And I guess when we're talking about person-centered therapy, the client leads the way. We don't teach them the model. We don't tell them about the theory that underpins the journey that they're on. And we wouldn't be asking them to do anything outside of sessions. Now, this doesn't mean that in person-centered therapy nothing happens outside of session, because process happens outside of outside of the actual session itself. But we're not actively directing or saying to the client, right, until I see you next time, this is what I need you to do. But within CBT, we are actively directing. We're giving exercises, we're giving homework to the client that they will work on outside of the session themselves. So we're actively directing them in what we believe they should be looking at. And the reasons why homework is effective in CBT is it develops a reliance not on the therapist, but on the client themselves. So they're working through stuff and having their own realizations, challenging their own perhaps irrational beliefs in their own time, and it breaks that reliance on the therapist. Yes, you need the therapist for that initial direction, but this is something they can carry on, take with them far after sessions finish. And that working outside of the sessions, I think in some ways develops a self-reliance, more of a I can do this if I have the right questions and the right techniques to question who I am, why I'm doing what I'm doing, I'm able to overcome this. And I think that that's a great benefit of that homework model.
Absolutely, Ken. And it equips clients with a toolbox. I was speaking to someone who'd had some CBT therapy a couple of years ago, and she said it really works. You just keep having to apply the homework, apply the thinking. And I think there lies its Achilles heel to some extent, because it does rely on the application of the theories. And when people stop applying them, they may go back to old ways of thinking or cognitive distortions. And that's one of the criticisms of CBT, that it relies on a kind of external process for self-development, that of looking at your world and checking it against the reality of it. And it's really interesting what you say about Carl Rogers and how it differs from person-centered therapy. Rogers, Ken, Rogers teased us a little bit. He teased us just a little bit. In the book A Way of Being, there's a really good quote, and it says, "Experience for me is the highest authority. It's not the parables or the work of Freud. It's to my experience that I return to again and again in the process of becoming." And that is the quote that is always seen. You see it in assignments, you see it in quote sites, that type of thing. But if you read down the page, it actually goes on. He actually says, "My experience is infallible. Therefore, it needs to be checked in new and primary ways." And I think it's a bit of a nod to asking clients to check out, even in person-centered therapy, is that the reality of things? Of course, in CBT, we look, CBT therapists would look for cognitive distortions. So they'd look at things like fallacy of fairness. Someone who comes to see him says, life's not fair. Why isn't life fair? And again, there should be some homework around that. But it is interesting that a lot of therapies do challenge people's perceptions.
Yeah, very much so, and you're speaking about one of the criticisms of CBT being that if the client chooses maybe not to do the homework, then the therapy will be less effective. And I think that's interesting. It reminds me of a joke. How many therapists does it take to change a light bulb? Just the one, but the light bulb really needs to want to change. That's the joke, which I tell very badly. My joke timing, not the best here. I don't think we should start a comedy podcast, Rory. I don't think it'd take off. But it's about that. If CBT is the model that the client is engaging in, they need to have some level of self-motivation of a want to change where they find themselves. It's not I arrive at therapy, I tell you what's going on for me, right, fix me, healer, tell me, not even tell me what to do, just fix me, get out your spanner, get out your tools and fix me. It relies on the client fixing themselves. It's interesting when I kind of say that, it makes me realize that all therapy pretty much relies on the client finding their own way, but more so with CBT having to do the actions that are suggested. So some of the homework that I was kind of having a look at, and if you kind of look online and you put in CBT homework, you maybe come across many worksheets, and there are worksheets, but it doesn't have to just be worksheets. It might be suggested reading outside of the therapy session. It could be journaling. And now this is an interesting one, because I work from a person-centered model, and I happily suggest to a client that they might wish to journal during their process. Now, I don't set it as homework. I put it out there that some clients may have found this useful, and from a true person-centered base, it's the client's choice of what they choose to do. But within CBT, you might say, I need you to keep a journal as you go through this process. Something like meditation or breathing exercises could be given as homework in a cognitive behavioral therapy relationship, where the therapist may say, I want you to use this application, this online app, to do some meditation or some breathing exercises. So mental health app suggestions is not uncommon when working with CBT. And I guess those are just a couple of the examples of what we might come across in terms of homework, as well as the worksheets, the base model that may be taught to the client as well.
Yeah, absolutely, Ken. And some homework could be really remarkably simple and remarkably effective. I know someone who believed that everybody was looking at them, and the therapist said to them, next time you go into town, go and have a look in the shop window, and instead of looking at the goods in the shop window, have a look either side in the reflection of the glass and see if people are looking at you. And it was a remarkable transformation, because what you see cannot lie. You know, the person looks in the window and people just walk past them. People weren't looking at them. And that was the beginning of a process of change. You know, that was the evidence. It's an evidence-based practice. And I think that is why CBT is probably chosen as a therapy of choice for things like the National Health Service, because it was built to be evidenced. And the homework it's absolutely essential part of it. And within that homework, of course, practitioners can then mark the change within a client and share it with them. So they can have a sheet that says, are you feeling very nervous about this or not nervous at all? A good example of that would be flying. Someone who's afraid of flying, they do specialist courses for people who are afraid of flying, and they mark them at the beginning. How do you feel? They're very nervous. And at the end, they'll mark them and they'll say, I'm not nervous at all. And there's the evidence, that's what you said. So it's an evidence-based practice. And I think it has its place in the pantheon of therapies, Ken.
Oh, for sure. And it has a main place, at least here in the United Kingdom. It is a commonly practiced modality. And as you say, I mean, it's got those pluses for CBT in that it is easily measured or assessed. You can kind of show the client was here and now they're here. It is also effective in short bursts, so you can have a 3 or 6 within 3 to 6 sessions. You can have a measurable difference because the client is working on a specific presentation, and they'll be working outside of the sessions as well. And another thing that makes it one of the pluses, I guess, for CBT is that it can be tailored to the client. So depending on who the client is, and so an example is that if the client has an artistic streak, they like to draw, they like to paint, they like to express themselves artistically, then the therapist might suggest an art piece for homework. What I want you to do in this next week is paint a picture of the emotions that you feel, for example, and bring that along next time, and we'll talk about that. So you can actually fit it for who the client is and their, I guess, learning style or understanding style. So it does offer flexibility. It is measurable. Of course, we've already spoken about the fact that it does have some areas where it has critique. But on balance, interesting. We have lots more about CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, including the theory and the base modality of how CBT works using the ABC model. And you can get that from going to counsellingtutor.com, and in the top menu bar under theory, select CBT. We got a ton of stuff. Or just go to counsellingtutor.com. Got a little search engine for counselling on there, and if you put in CBT, loads of stuff will come back if you want to learn more about that base model. But there you have it. That is our student check-in. And as we move away from our student check-in, we now go over to our digital counselling resolution. Can't speak. It's not a resolution, is it? It's not a new year. It's the digital counselling Revolution. And today, asynchronous communication and focusing on timing in asynchronous communication.
Digital Counselling Revolution.
Yes, I think one of the lesser spoken about areas of online therapy is actually text-based, text and email. And one of the things that comes up when we think about email-based encounters with our clients is the timing of sending an email. When we send emails, we just tend to send them. I don't know about you, Ken, but I write an email and just click send and it's gone. But actually, when we're using email in therapy, do we contract for a therapeutic hour where it's received? Do we negotiate with the clients and say, I will send you this email at 4:00 on Wednesdays, and you send that email to them, and they are prepared to receive that email like they would be going into their own therapy room. And I think it's really, really important. One of the biggest learnings I had was phoning a client when I was a student, because they hadn't attended, and part of the organization's policies was we gave them a ring. And I phoned them the day after the therapy session was booked. And my supervisor said, you shouldn't have done that. You should phone them on the day and the hour. You should have phoned them when they hadn't turned up. You should have phoned them within the hour, because that is their therapeutic time. You don't know what they're doing either side of that.
Yeah,
they could be, and that was a real rookie error, and one that I never repeated. And I think the same thing goes for therapy. You might have someone who's working, and all of a sudden an email turns up, and it's a therapeutic response. They might be in the middle of doing their work, so you need to set the time aside. If you're doing asynchronous work, and mainly email here, as you would a therapeutic hour. I think it's just so important, Ken.
It is, and it's really interesting that we're covering this topic today, because just before we met up to record this episode, I was going through my inbox. And I was going through my inbox with intent. And what I mean is I was looking for a reply to an email that I'd sent yesterday. I'd sent to a friend where I'd asked them some advice on something. And I was having a look to see if they've replied. And they haven't replied. And I was looking through and I felt a sense of disappointment. Oh, I don't have an answer. I wonder if they got my email, because this person usually replies when I send them an email. So I go into this whole thought pattern based on the fact that I don't have an email back from this person. And just speaking about this now and relating that to a client journey. So if you have contracted to work asynchronously, which means not in real time. That's just what that means. So synchronous is on the telephone, is synchronous. In a room, person to person, is synchronous. It's happening in real time. Asynchronous would be email, where you send them something, they read it, not at the time you wrote it, and they will come back to you at a different time. And thinking about a client who may choose to share something they've never shared with another human being ever, their deepest, most innermost secret that is not even acceptable to self, but I'm in therapy now, this is what I need to do, I'm going to share this with this person, and they send that email out, and then they don't hear back, and then that wondering sets in. I wonder if they got it. I wonder what happened there. And we speak about John Sulo, we speak about the black hole effect, and it kind of keys in a little bit to that. But I think it's so important, if you are working asynchronously, if you are working with email, that there is a set therapeutic time, a time that you will receive emails, that you will look at emails, and that you will reply to email, and that is contracted very clearly with the client, so they know what to expect. They know how long it will take you to have a look over what they've sent, and they know when to expect an email back. And further into that, what they should do if they don't get that email back. Now, what do I mean by that? So let's say that the contract is that you will receive my answer by 4:00 on a Wednesday afternoon. And the client kind of goes in at 4:10 on that Wednesday, and there is no email. What has happened? What do they do next? How do they kind of reach out and find out what's going on? And the reason I say this is because some emails are just directed to the spam box by your email service provider. We know this because in Counselling Tutor we send out quite a few emails, and many people say, I didn't get the email, it ended up in my spam box. Well, of course, we would be educating the client about spam and marking us as a safe sender during our contracting and working with asynchronous communication, but always having that backup plan, maybe a number that they can text or something that the client can do, because that feeling of I've put something out there and I'm not hearing back, that can be quite damaging.
Absolutely. And I think it's worth acknowledging that some clients may choose email therapy because they've got a very fragile process. They may not feel ready for face-to-face work, and it's easier for them to write an email and send it and await a response. So I think we have to be, not all clients, all clients need the highest levels of service and respect. But I think if we're thinking about asynchronous communication, especially with email, it's just so important that if you've set a time that the client will get a response, that's when you send it. And I guess it also kind of links into the broader question of what constitutes an hour of therapy. You might have to negotiate with the client that they'll send an email. You'll spend a whole hour thinking about a response, write that response, and then send it back. But it is just so important. It's so important in general practice to think about where the client is in terms of the therapeutic space, and make sure that, if it's 4:00 on a Friday afternoon, and that's what you're contracted for, that's when you send it. I think that it's something that, in a world of fast responses and I send emails all the time, but I think it's something that you really need to give a lot of thought to.
Yeah, and I think that this thought starts when you first meet that client, when they reach out to you, and you kind of going through your contracting and assessment stage. Because as we've kind of said, when you're speaking about asynchronous communication, something that's not happening in real time, there is a gap between the client sharing something and the client hearing anything back. And if you look to yourself and your own experience, have you ever had a situation where you've sent out a message? Maybe you've applied for a job. So you've sent out your application, you've put a whole load of work into that, and you're waiting for a response to come in. You can kind of feel on tender hooks, even when you have a date. Even if you're applying for a job and they say, we'll get back to everybody by Friday, the such and such a date. So even when you have a date that you're expecting a reply back, you can still feel emotions with something that you have put out that you have not had a response on. So in synchronous communication, the client puts something out, they may share something about their journey, and they kind of get received, held, and maybe some feedback right there and then. So when they leave therapy, a good therapist will be closing that client down, making sure they're okay before they leave the room. And we don't have that... We don't have the ability to do that if we're working with email. The client, even in writing the email, will be opening a process, specifically if they're sharing traumatic events from the past. They will be accessing those memories. They will be revisiting that trauma and putting it down and sending it out, and then they're left open. They haven't been closed down. They haven't been shown that they've been heard. So I think when entering into asynchronous communication, that needs to be kept in mind. At least the client needs to understand and know that. And I think this is why the timing is so important with this. And maybe it would be that you wouldn't have a client send you an email on a Monday and only get a reply on a Friday. You might suggest that the client sends the email on the Friday morning, because your therapeutic hour for them is at 11 o'clock on a Friday, and you'll look over it, and by 11:30 they'll have their answer. So timing, so important when working specifically email asynchronous communication.
Yes, absolutely, Ken. And I think it's a very specialist form of therapy, and one that I think needs a specific skill in writing. I think being able to speak and being able to write are two different disciplines. So if you are thinking of doing asynchronous communication, I would be thoughtful of your writing style. Do you write well enough to communicate back to the client? But as you say, Ken, when we're talking about asynchronous communication, timing is absolutely everything, and that black hole effect can be absolutely devastating.
The more we speak about this, the more I realize the importance of training. We say it again and again and again, professional training to be competent, to work within the legislation that governs your country or where you are in the world, and in best service of the client. It's not a case of taking what we do face to face and just putting it in an email and sending it out. There's so much to consider, and I guess we're called on to train and sharpen our competences in service of our clients. If you're interested, Counselling Tutor do offer an online and telephone counselling certificate course. And if you're interested in finding out more about that, just go to counsellingtutor.com, and the certificate in online and telephone counselling is there. We do cover text and internet messenger communication in that course as well. So moving away from that digital counselling revolution, we're now going to Practice Matters, where we look at something from practice. Recently, Simon Heath kindly did an incredible lecture which has been added to the Counsellor CPD library. If you're interested in that, just go to counsellingtutor.com. All the info about everything we talk about is there. And he spoke about ecotherapy. This is an interesting topic, and I know that this is a topic of its time. I've heard a lot of buzz about ecotherapy, Rory.
Yes, I think it is a topic of its time, driven by the pandemic when people can't meet face to face. The idea of what's called walk and talk therapy has really taken a hold, and also it kind of links in to the wider view of being out with nature, being connected with the metaphors of nature, and also just being out in the fresh air. And we caught up with Simon, and this is what he had to say.
Practice Matters.
And we welcome Simon Heath, who's recently given a lecture on ecotherapy. So first of all, thank you for joining us on the podcast, Simon.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Yeah, so ecotherapy, just give us a little bit of an overview on what ecotherapy is.
So ecotherapy is an umbrella term, really, for a whole range of therapeutic work that takes place outside. Where I work is mainly in the realms of walk and talk therapy, where I work with a client side by side, walking through different parts of the countryside. But it involves many different other areas as well, sort of like gardening therapy or going on forest bathing exercises with maybe groups of people.
Oh, right. So anything that's outside, it could be walking, forest bathing. Did you say
forest bathing? Yeah, it's a Japanese way of sort of really communing with nature, where you go and sit in a forest maybe for an hour or so, maybe longer, and just really immerse yourself in the sounds, the smells, the whatever else is going on within the woodland.
Wow. Now, You've recently given a lecture on ecotherapy, and I wonder what people will learn from your lecture. What kind of information did you share with people?
It's really an introductory guide, really, into what to think about in terms of working outside with clients. It's a very, I find it a really connecting way of working, but it does bring up a whole range of different things just to be considered. So I've kind of looked at what it would be like if you were working with a client and maybe deciding that you wanted to work outside with them, or if you just wanted to start introducing elements of ecotherapy with clients in some way. So it could be that you'd want to start off with a very simple kind of walk and talk therapy, or it could be that you want to start just bringing in elements of the outside into your therapeutic working space. And it's just a really, hopefully a really gentle guide into that way of working.
Yeah, and I guess you talked a little bit about having to think about things like risk assessment and that type of thing.
Absolutely, yeah. So with all the work that I do, my clients' well-being is my number one priority, and it's looking at all the other things on top of what we would normally look at. So it could be what happens if we meet somebody that either the client knows or that I know, or what happens if we're working, as happened the other day. I was explaining the Johari window to somebody with some sticks on the ground, and a dog comes along and sits right in the middle of the Johari window. So it's just how you kind of work with all of those kind of things, and just really looking at the contracts and all of the paperwork that goes behind the way that we work when we're working outside.
Yes, and I guess to some extent you've got to get client buy-in for this. You wouldn't immediately say, "Oh, by the way, today we're going for a 3-mile hike."
So, no, absolutely. It's very much, I find that the clients that I work with outside are the ones that have come to me because that's what they really want to do. They either already enjoy being outside as part of their own kind of well-being, or it's people that are stuck inside all the time that actually, when they're with me, want to go out and actually explore and experience being outside in a natural setting.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm guessing that you would have to think about specific contracting within ecotherapy. You'd have shared with the people who saw the lecture what kind of contracting needed to take place.
Absolutely, yeah. I'll cover all of that sort of thing. My own personal contracts I have working outside are a lot longer, are more detailed in many respects than the contract I have for working with clients in a room. And we cover all of that sort of thing. We look at also the kind of the balance between client autonomy and also the duty of care that we have. So I make it very clear that we will be working outside no matter what the weather, and that certain footwear is probably better than others. But I don't then, if it's raining, ring the client up and say, don't forget your coat, sort of thing. It's a real mix, and all of that is in the contract. But I think it's still worth saying that. I mentioned that in the lecture that it's about making sure that the client has that autonomy still.
Yeah, and it seems to me it's a very holistic approach. You did talk about the more health-driven benefits, not just the mental health benefits, but also the physical benefits of walking around.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, not just for the clients, but for myself as well. I know that when I'm working, it's a normal 50-minute session, but in that time we'll probably do a good couple of miles if we're, and some clients will really want to sort of step it out, and others will want to kind of walk a little way and stop. But yeah, there are definitely physical benefits combined with the emotional mental health benefits are kind of what it's all about for me. That and the connection with the world around us, and trying to look at how we fit within the world rather than us being separate from the natural places that we live in.
Yeah, so a sense of connectedness.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, and the way that when I'm working outside, that nature provides its own metaphors as well. So the sort of, as we're walking, they may well come across an obstacle in the path, and that becomes then something that we can then work with in terms of the therapeutic practice.
Yes, because obviously the scenery is moving in ecotherapy. You'd be pretty fixed with the scenery in the room, aren't you? You know,
Absolutely. Yeah, and it is. I mean, it changes from season to season, from week to week, and from one at the start of the session to the end of the session. I'm thinking about the way that the weather can change, or just by being in a different part of the landscape, it can really change the connection and the relationship between myself and the clients.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you find it's a different relationship when you're doing ecotherapy than it is in the room?
Yeah, it is. It's as you know, every client is different, but there is definitely there's something about a shared experience, I think, in terms of if you're out and you both hear a bird song, or you both. I remember one instance, I was walking along, we walked under a tree, and for whatever reason, there was a real sense of almost like walking into a pool of warm air. And we both just stopped and went, "Did you just experience that?" And we both then went back and just stood for a moment in that space under the tree. And we don't really understand why it was as warm as it was in that space, but there was something that we shared in that moment that was very connecting.
Yeah, it feels very phenomenological and very very hyper connected, because it's not only using the relationship, but it's using the environment as well.
Absolutely, yes, and it is. It's about it's really about connecting on so many different levels, and it's not just the person to person, but it does feel as though where I'm working is almost like a second therapist.
How interesting!
Yeah,
how interesting!
It's quite difficult to explain without sort of, I think, sounding quite sort of off the wall. But it is something that I would definitely recommend people give it's about that increased awareness. I think that for me is what's the most important thing, and I know that a number of my clients, it's what they really appreciate as well.
Well, I think that you've summed it up beautifully in the lecture you gave. I know it went down very, very well. And if you're interested in ecotherapy, then it's really not a lecture to be missed, because it's got some really good information in it. And I'd like to say to you, Simon Heath, thank you so much for joining me.
Big thank you to Simon Heath for that interview. And remember, if you like what you heard, if you want to delve a little deeper into ecotherapy, you can hear Simon Heath's complete lecture on ecotherapy, and you can get that from the Counsellor CPD library. And if you're interested in information of how to join that, you just go to counsellingtutor.com, and all the information is there for you.
Yeah, so what an interesting episode. We started off by talking about CBT and the use of homework. We had a look at why homework is an essential part of the success of CBT. And then in the Digital Counselling Revolution, we talked about the timing of sending asynchronous responses, making sure that your client doesn't experience that uncomfortable black hole effect. And then we finally finished with Practice Matters with Simon Heath and ecotherapy, where he talks about walk and talk therapy. So as always, stay grounded, stay safe, and hey, join the Digital Counselling Revolution.
If you're a qualified counsellor or psychotherapist, then why not check out the Counselor CPD library? Stay current with your CPD requirements with over 150 hours of academically rigorous, on-demand lectures you can stream to your device. Joining Counselor CPD will expand your skill set to create a more specialised, highly rewarding practice. For more information on the Counselor CPD library, visit counsellingtutor.com.
Thank you for listening to the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Find the show notes for this episode on our website at www.counsellingtutor.com.